All right, Karen, you're on.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Up Next, approaching the regular state legislative session. Up Next is a webinar series supporting Iberia Parish resiliency, hosted by the Greater Iberia Chamber of Commerce. Today's edition is designed to connect you with your legislators as they share information about what we might expect from the upcoming 2021 state legislative session. I'm Karen Bechet, Greater Iberia Chamber of Commerce board member, principal of Louisville High School, and the moderator for this morning's webinar. We're pleased that so many of you could be with us this morning. We have 62 participants with us this morning. To our audience, microphones are muted to reduce background distractions. And if attendees have questions for the panelists, please type them in the chat box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. And chamber staff will monitor the chat box and submit your questions as time allows. For clarification, the purpose of this event is to provide information to chamber members and the community at large. It is not a debate format. We will cover, though, as many pertinent topics as time allows. At this time, I ask today's distinguished panel representing our core state representation for Iberia Parish to introduce yourselves, including mentioning the legislative committees that you serve on. Senator Mills, representing Senate District 22. Will you go first, please, sir?
Sure. Good morning. And I'd like to thank the Chamber for one thing, especially for putting my graduation picture on the billboard. I really appreciate that. Thank y'all so much. You made me look a little bit younger with the rest of the guys. I'm chairman of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. This is my second term of doing that, so it's my 6th year. I'm on the Audit Advisory Committee. I'm on the Select Committee for Women and Children. I'm on the Chaffalot Basin Committee, Joint Budget Committee, and it's a pleasure to represent Iberia Parish. I've been doing that for now almost 10 years.
Thank you, Senator Mills. Representative Blake Miguez, representing District 49.
How you doing? My name is Blake Miguez. I'm state representative for District 49. I represent Iberia and Vermilion Parish. In the House, I am fortunate enough to be the House Republican Delegation Chair. I lead the near supermajority of House members who are Republican in the Louisiana House. Also serve on the Appropriations Committee. So happy to be on the call today. Thank you all so much for including me.
Thank you for being with us. Representative Boboye, representing District 48.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for having us, Chamber. Ms. Bechet, thank you all for putting this on. This is a great way to talk to everyone before the session starts. I represent Iberia Parish, a good chunk of Southern Lafayette Parish, and a little thin sliver of St. Martin Parish. I serve as Vice Chair of the Retirement Committee. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, the House and Governmental Affairs Committee as well, which is in charge of the redistricting. I also serve as Vice Chair of the Acadiana Delegation, and I'm on the Joint Committee for Capital Outlay as well.
Good morning, sir. And finally, but last but not least, Representative Marcus Bryant, representing District 96.
Good morning. Again, thank y'all for having this. This is great for our community and district. I represent 96, which is the heart of Iberia, the heart of St. Martinville, Parks, and Breaux Bridge. I also go through the north side of Lafayette, and I catch all the way up to Turlins Catholic. And I go through the heart of Broussard in the business district in Broussard, where the Walmart and Bayou Tartu area is located. I sit on House Ways and Means with my colleague Boboye. I also sit on House Criminal Justice and also Agriculture and Committee on Agriculture, and also I'm on 3 task force, the DUI task force, I'm on a fines and fees task force, and I'm on a task force to address juvenile justice. Thank you all again for having this, and that's it.
Thank you for being with us, Representative Bryant. As we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that the regular legislative session convenes at noon on Monday, April 12th, and adjourns no later than 6 p.m. on June 10th. Committees have been meeting for some time and bills are currently being filed. I'd also like to remind our audience that contacted information for the elected officials who represent Iberia Parish, along with footage of today's webinar and additional resources can be found at iberiachamber.org/upnext. You can keep up with legislation in progress by viewing the live stream committee meetings, and a link for this streaming can be also found at the iberiachamber.org/upnext. With that being said, panelists, today's discussion is much more informal than our Eggs and Issues post legislative session. So let's begin. Finances are on our mind. What are you all expecting to see relative to the state budget, tax reform, and the gas tax? And how are these issues specifically related? Do I have a volunteer to begin?
I guess I can, Fred, would you like to go ahead? Okay, I could start off a little bit about the state's budget. So this year, it looks like the total size of our budget will be around $36.6 billion, one of the largest state budgets in our history. We're in an area of turmoil right now. We're not exactly sure, and the economists across this state are not exactly sure what the current economic state is in Louisiana as it references tax collections. In the short term, when you look at tax collections, we actually have a surplus of around $270 million for FY20 and around $293 million of excess for FY21. The reason I say things are in turmoil is mainly due to the fact that we're coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's been a lot of large federal stimulus money that's been coming down through from the feds down to the state level. We're in the start of our third stimulus package from the feds that just got passed last week. So every time this money comes down, it totally changes the entire landscape for the appropriations process. Generally, the state legislators we get this money from the feds. It usually comes with the strings attached. You can use it on this or you can't use it on that. And every single package seems to be very unique. The most recent one is probably going to be more geared towards state and local government. We're being told initially, and granted, this is all fresh information, that there'll be around $5.2 billion coming to the state of Louisiana. $3.2 billion will go to the state level, with $2 billion going to the locals, and that'll be broken up into 2 payments over the next year. Now, my understanding is that money's a lot more flexible than the money in the past. We haven't had full legislative discussions on exactly where it'll go yet, but there's been some discussion. I think you're seeing a consensus between the administration and the legislature that probably about a third of that money, if allowable, needs to go into the unemployment trust fund. As you know, the unemployment numbers reached historic highs, as close or as high as the Great Depression last year during the pandemic. And we had billions of dollars in our unemployment trust fund paid by all the small business owners across this state when they paid the unemployment tax every quarter. So that money was depleted down to zero. We actually got into a deficit spending scenario where we had to borrow money from the feds. We went into the last recent session and we appropriated around 120 or 180 million. The number doesn't come straight to mind, back into that fund. And we spent down that money over the last several months since September. And as of about 2 weeks ago, we're back into deficit spending and borrowing money. The balance of that's around 140 million that we owe to the government. As of now, we're paying no interest on it. The interest doesn't kick in till later this year, but hopefully we'll take a section of that $3.2 billion and pay down towards that. Now, where the rest of the money goes will be a debate. There's several different ideas on where that money could go, but that's sort of where we sit as a legislature now. Keep in mind that when I tell you that none of the smartest economists and the smartest senator, which we have on the call right now, couldn't figure out where this money what our state's economy looks like. Now, look, from a business person standpoint, I understand that our state's been devastated over the last year. But from a tax collection standpoint, when federal money comes in, it can spur, there's been stimulus checks, there's been a lot of unemployment checks going out. This can spur local spending, which you see in sales tax revenues. Our oil and gas industry has been in turmoil, so severance tax has been down, corporate income tax has been a place that I guess Bo could talk about a little bit later. He knows a little bit more about the REC forecast. What I'm telling you is that if you had to make a budget for the annual for this 1 year, this is the year you probably want to try to relook at your budget every 6 months, because it may take the state of Louisiana, the United States, and this the entire world an entire year to just get by COVID-19 and understand where we are. And once we understand where we are, those economists can start pinning down what those numbers look like and get a more accurate total of our funds. My personal politics, and I'll tell you where I stand on the budget process. I'm a strong believer that whatever we have in surplus dollars, because things are so much in turmoil and so uncertain, that we should use those funds to spend them on one-time expenditures. If we have computer systems that need to be bought, if we need to pay down debt defeasance, if we need to build roads, we need to rebuild our coast, things that we can use that money for one-time expenditures. What I caution the legislature is not to use these surplus dollars, which we don't know if they're real and they'll be backed up by a real economy down the road, on reoccurring expenditures. Because when you spend them on reoccurring expenditures, you're building the baseline of your budget, you're effectively growing state government, and the next year, because we use a continuation budget style budgeting, it'll always grow larger than that. And we don't know whether we'll have the revenues to support that. And what that means to you, business owners and taxpayers, that means a very strong debate about raising your taxes. And that's the last thing I want to see a debate happen. I want us to be fiscally responsible on the front end, so we don't have to have a food fight on the House floor about where those funds would go or talk about raising your taxes. And we're learning from our past mistakes. After Hurricane Katrina, we learned that a lot of the money was spent. The legislature, quote unquote, spent like drunken sailors at the time. And they built the baseline of the budget so large that down the road, it led to some of the most turmoil on the House floor and some of the largest tax increases this state has seen in state's history. We want to avoid that. And Senator, if you want to take over from there, that's a little bit of a high point of where we are with our budget now.
You did a great job, Blake. And on behalf of the Iberia delegation, I'd like to thank the chamber and Karen, all of the school teachers for the 1 year of just yeoman's work that you guys did. I don't think we can thank you guys enough for what you've done from an educational standpoint. So we do have to take a little break and thank you guys for everything. And so from that aspect, Blake really hit it. And I guess I'd like to tell all of the viewers and listeners that the action that Blake talked about begins in the House. So as far as the budget's concerned, the House members, and it's an absolute honor to work with these three gentlemen that represent Iberia Parish. They do a great job. But that debate will take place. So from my vantage point, by the time I get to vote on the budget, it'll probably have gone through the Senate, House Appropriations. It'll go through a full House debate. It'll go to Senate Finance, and I'll get that final vote. So what Blake and Marcus and Bo see can be a whole different look by the time it comes to the Senate. So one thing I did want all of the people listening to this and viewing this is that certain pieces of legislation that my colleagues will get a first look at, by the time it comes to the House or the Senate, it can change in the version we're looking at. So I tried coming up with some key words for us to talk about today. And I think the first thing that Blake did a great job of talking about is the budget. And when you look at the budget, it'll have a whole different look and feel because of federal money. And I asked the Senate staff yesterday to guesstimate how much money will be coming into Louisiana. I'm talking about school boards, I'm talking about municipalities, parishes, different agencies in the state. And I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget it. $5 to $9 billion is estimated in different tranches of money. So that's gonna, as Blake said, that's gonna have a whole different debate, and even parish government and local government will have those debates of where's your parameters, where you can move with that money, and where can you spend it. I can tell you from being in the banking industry and the PPP program, what's really a challenge is as Treasury develops guidelines, those guidelines can change every few weeks. So are we talking about in 2 to 3 weeks on certain parameters and certain guidelines? That could change totally. On the tax issue, and I know my colleagues will talk about it because that's where most of the action begins, is in the House. I think from the tax standpoint, when you look at the tax burden in Louisiana and the rankings, we're not ranked that badly as far as the tax burden for taxpayers. What we are ranked in a horrible situation is the complexity of the tax system. So what the debate's going to take place this year, and I'll ask my colleagues to jump in on that, is how much can we simplify the tax code? And I can tell you from the debates I've heard over the 13 years I've been in the House and Senate, it looks good on paper, But if you're going to lower the tax base and you're going to maybe get rid of exemptions, there are perceived winners and losers. And that's where it's a really tough debate. I mean, we looked at lifting some exemptions years ago, and when we even talked about lifting exemptions for the agricultural industry, the bills never moved forward. So that's going to be a big issue. Then the other key word I wanted to just talk about to set the background is the number 5. Because it's a fiscal session, we as legislators can only introduce 5 non-fiscal bills. And that's going to be a challenge for all of us, because last session during COVID-19, there were many bills that we wanted to move forward, but because it was a condensed session, we chose certain bills. So it's a mad dash right now to see which 5 bills we're going to all introduce, and maybe we can spend some time talking about that issue. And then the other issue I just wanted everybody to understand is that different committees will have different complexities of what we're looking at. And we'll talk a little bit about what bills we'll be seeing from our committee standpoint. So maybe we can, I hope that sets the table, and I'll turn it to the rest of my colleagues.
Marcus, would you like to go? Would you like me to go?
You're on mute,
All right.
Marcus.
You're on mute.
Marcus, you're on mute.
Bo, yeah, Bo, go ahead so you can talk about the tax stuff while we're doing that.
Okay. Thank y'all, guys. Look, I want to touch on a couple of things just to follow up on a couple of items that were mentioned. Blake talked about the unemployment trust fund. And it's important for all the business owners out there to understand that with the money that we borrowed, if we wouldn't have passed legislation last year in October to pause some necessary tax or some required taxes, that our businesses community would already be paying back some of those monies on a federal level. We have some statutory requirements that requires to impose taxes, unemployment taxes on our businesses when our trust fund gets below a certain amount and once we start borrowing the money. So we all worked on some legislation to put a big pause in that so that it isn't an undue tax on our business community. And what Representative Miguez says is absolutely correct. It's important that we use some of those dollars to shore up that trust fund, because if not, our businesses, which have borne the brunt of a lot of this COVID, are going to be the ones that are also taking it on the chin with paying back these unemployment trust fund dollars. The other thing, just as with regards to being conservative with some of the dollars last year, for the first time in the history of Louisiana, during the capital outlay process, we actually set up a capital outlay savings account. For the first time ever, we didn't spend everything that we had. We saved about $100 million in this capital outlay savings account because we knew that some darker days were likely ahead. When you look at the monies that are coming into the state's fisc, into our local municipalities, it is real money because the monies are being generated, but from a tax standpoint, that's helping all our municipalities. But the source of that money is federal stimulus, and so it's not from genuine economic activity. So if we aren't all keenly aware that although things look halfway decent when you're looking at different tax rolls from municipal standpoints, things can be dire as soon as these federal dollars run out, if our businesses aren't on good footing. But to go into some of the tax reform items, we've been meeting for probably about 6 months to work on different legislation to bring towards for the people and to carry different bills. And we have a whole host of bills that we're looking at. The one that I'm going to be kind of rolling my sleeves up in and having fun with is on the centralized sales tax collection. Right now, Louisiana is one of only three states in the country that has a decentralized collection system in Louisiana. And this puts us at a disadvantage when we're looking at other states. I didn't learn about our antiquated sales tax collection system when I got in the legislature. I learned about it as a business person. We handle 401k plans, and so we're in the offices of a lot of businesses throughout Louisiana and Texas, and we've heard time and time again how difficult it is and how complex our sales tax system is. And one of the big differentiators is the fact that we have 54 collectors throughout the state that are collecting sales tax. We just started collecting internet sales tax in July, but we don't have we have a decent system there that's bringing in some nice dollars. I believe between August and December, the state was able to collect like $115 million in what we call remote sales tax, and a little bit over half of that is going down to the different parishes. But that system is still not completely right. There is a little bit of a discrimination between interstate business and intrastate business, and there's some belief that our state is probably ripe for some sort of a federal lawsuit with regards to how we collect taxes and how we discriminate on that internet sales tax collection system. So you're going to hear a whole lot about centralized sales tax for all the businesses out there. This is what you've been asking for so many years, so we're bringing it to you. For all of our municipalities that are out there, we aren't going to be cutting into any of the revenue when we're doing that. We're going to be using, to pay for it, we'll be using the existing remote sales tax collection fee that is paid. So we won't be cutting into the parishes, the cities, the school boards, the sheriff's offices, those who are collecting. They'll still be able to keep all their money. It's going to be a hotly debated topic. They've tried to do it for a long time now, so I don't expect it to be an easy road, but it's one that we're prepared to go after. And I think it's important if we're going to move the state forward and even forward looking at some of these exemptions that Senator DeMille's talked about on the sales tax standpoint. We're also going to be looking at a couple other hot items. You know, Louisiana has a franchise tax, which puts us at a disadvantage to other states. We are looking to try and completely get rid of over a 5-year period that franchise tax. And same thing with regards to, there's some discussions regarding inventory tax, completely different subject matter. And inventory tax, our local municipalities are dependent on that inventory tax to survive. So in order for that to happen, we have to give our local municipalities a way to generate revenue for them to stay open. Corporate and personal income tax, we'll be looking at some reform measures there. The big ticket item they're looking at right now, we're one of very few states that allow us the deduction from our federal income tax deduction. And when you talk to the tax foundation and these other national tax groups, they say it puts us at a disadvantage because it hurts the predictability of our revenue. Now, before we do anything that allows us to get rid of our federal income tax deduction, there better be a good lowering of tax rates to make it worth our while. If they don't lower tax rates well enough, I think that thing is dead on arrival. But I think if they can come up with some other ways to make it more attractive to all of us who are taxpayers, we might listen. A big key thing in there when Blake and Senator Mills were talking about the federal dollars that are coming in, there is a stipulation in the receipt of those federal monies where we can't lower taxes in the state of Louisiana. If we lower our taxes, it's going to jeopardize our receipt of those monies. So anything we do from standpoint now, we know has to be tax neutral. So we can't have a revenue loss in that policy. So we're going to have to go far and beyond to prove it before we put that $5 to $9 billion in jeopardy. So we're gonna be very careful from that standpoint. But I kind of gave a 5,000 foot overview of some of those items that we're looking at. Marcus, you want to go ahead and chime in?
I think the biggest part of with the centralized tax sales or centralized tax collection is that it's supposed to increase our municipalities and local government revenue once the system is created and bring more revenue to the local government. Also, I think it was important to talk about the different tax reforms that you're doing or we're doing in ways and means, but the idea that they're going to have to be revenue neutral in order for them to pass a debate in the House and get over to the Senate side. And when you hear revenue neutral means that it doesn't affect our state budget and the things that we're trying to do for in government with each tax whatever, doing away with the tax or creating a new tax structure won't overall affect our state budget. The governor is also optimistic. His office is optimistic that sales taxes will go up. He believes that, and we have to be grateful for our governor at this time, because we're here having a discussion about what to do with money and how to save it and what areas we should spend it, because we're actually receiving it. And if you look across the country at states, some states, and what they're getting versus what Louisiana is getting from our president and our administration of $5.2 billion, 902 going to our local governments, our parish governments, and 572 million going to our cities, so that we can rebuild and recover from this COVID pandemic crisis, is a great thing. And that to have be able to have these kind of discussions is beautiful for Louisiana, because we could definitely be talking about a different tone and struggling and trying to figure out how we're going to survive. So we are now trying to figure out what to do with the money. We have to address our teachers. We're still about $4,000 below the Southern average. So Louisiana is still outlier in trying to get their teachers to pay, and they're dealing with the kids. They're dealing with COVID. They're dealing with it head on. And we're still trying to figure out, we're going to address giving the teachers a raise this session. We're also going to look at other factors for generating revenue in our state. So we're dealing with hemp. We're going to extend the rules for hemp to make it easier and faster and more productive for hemp farmers. We're looking at cannabis, and there's a couple of bills by our colleagues on both sides of the table to add add the leaf for medicinal purposes to help our kids and others, adults who are suffering from conditions where marijuana and hemp can help them. The FDA is also going to put in place, and we're going to pass a bill. Our speaker is going to bring a bill to allow gummies and edibles and gel packs for hemp purposes, which will bring more revenue. We actually collected about $232 million in new revenue this year from hemp production. So we anticipate that that'll grow. And if we add some cannabis deals to our, pass some cannabis legislation, that may add about another $400 million to our budget. There's also caveats that come with all of these different things and extending out and creating marijuana, extending and opening up our state to be a marijuana state. We have a task force in place. I have a bill also to do a study on all the ups and downs that comes with marijuana being legalized in your state. So that's it from my side. We have to look at different ways to increase revenue in our state. We also have to look at the different issues that we have in our state that's making us non-competitive with other states. So that's it for me.
There's a question in the chat box in response to your comments, panelists. It's any comments or thoughts on Biden's 60-day drilling ban coupled with yesterday's news on canceling March's lease sale, and any insight as to the purpose? Any response?
Blake, you want to hit that?
Yeah, well, the question would be most appropriate to a congressperson, but I can try to do the best I can answering it. So obviously this administration, I have trouble seeing eye to eye with the policy of this administration. I'm a very strong supporter of the oil and gas industry across this nation, and in particular Louisiana. They have a different perspective and looking at different ways to improve, fight the issues of climate change and their climate policies. So I think that's where you're seeing some of these issues where they're coming in there, not issuing you permits, they're stopping you lease sales. That's one perspective. I think the other perspective is just an administration change. I know we had one of our local Acadiana guys, Scott Ogel, was there. He's an expert when it comes to oil and gas. I think once the new president arrived, I think he got his pink slip within 30 days and he was off the job, probably because he's a big oil and gas supporter, and the new administration probably wanted somebody there that was a little bit more close to the climate change community. With that being said, anytime there's an administration change, there's going to be new people that show up. They're going to put new processes in place. And I think that first 6 months, that's what you're seeing. I think there's some politics that the new president, where he sits positionally in his party, some of his base vote would like to see the oil and gas industry go away completely. I 100% disagree with that. I think he's found himself to sort of in between two sides of his party, where he understands, and I hope he understands, that this nation cannot run without fossil fuels. Yeah, there's been a big push about progressively moving towards alternative energies, but common sense and science and everyone who studies the industry will prove that that can't happen overnight. That's a shift that could take, as close to almost decades to do. So once the politics and the new administration, all that sort of, and new people in those places sort of settle down, I hope we'll see policies going forward that allow the oil and gas industry to operate in a more normal fashion. Now, look, it'll be a new industry going forward. I'm sure there'll be some concessions made by the oil and gas industry to work towards some of the climate change initiatives that the president has. And I think this is happening on a larger level in DC, where you're probably seeing the large oil and gas industry, that industry probably negotiating with the administration behind closed doors. I don't want to speculate any more than that, but I think there's a lot of politics going on. I've seen the legislature and the state level hold a very aggressive hearing all day, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where we had congressmen like Congressman Higgins from the 3rd Congressional come down. I think, Gordy Dove, the parish president down in Terrebonne Parish, the Port Fourchon director, amongst other stakeholders in the oil and gas industry, local, state, and congressional level, talk about what can we do to get Louisiana's oil and gas industry from shutting down due to the Biden administration. I saw my other senator, I got two smart senators that represent my area. The other one's Senator Hinchkins from Vermillion. He's the chair of the Natural Resources Committee in the Senate. And he basically said, did the governor call the president? I mean, we know that Governor Edwards and President Biden are very close. Did he call the president, ask him, and let him know how much this affects Louisiana? We didn't get an answer to that. I know the answer. The answer was no. He hadn't called him yet. The governor has had his issues with Louisiana oil and gas industry through his whole tenure there. But I think at some point he finally was able to send a letter there. But we're encouraging our governor, who is the person that has the closest relationship outside of Cedric Richmond, the former congressman from Congressional District 2, to let the president know how important the oil and gas industry is to Louisiana, and that Louisianans, we understand his policies and what he's trying to do, and we want to move forward, and we want to look at alternative sources of energy. I think Louisiana is a perfect place. We're talking about wind. We have solar panels here already being installed in the state, but we have to remember that the oil and gas industry and fossil fuels is something that's definitely needed for the next several decades. And my perspective is they think they can get rid of oil and gas and tell them to stop using oil and gas, and they'll quickly realize how much oil and gas is in their everyday life. From their toothbrush till they wake up in the morning, to the car that they ride, to their children's pencils and papers, everything's on oil and gas. And we'd be fools to believe that we can live without it in the short term. But that's my perspective on it. I don't know if any of the other representatives have any more information they can add.
I'll add one other item. When we had that hearing, when everyone came down to speak, when Higgins and the whole crew, with all the oil and gas industry, spoke as well. One of the things that was brought up and discussed, just kind of in some of the people who are visiting, is a lot of your oil and gas companies, especially your majors, kind of anticipated some of this. And so they did buy up some leases to keep them busy for a while. So short term, the impact won't be great. But if this is a continued trend, we're going to see the price of oil and gas go even higher. This morning, I was just now looking on my phone. NYMEX crude is at like $64 a barrel. If we have a long term,
that's right.
If we end up having a long-term shutdown, and all of a sudden we have get oil back where it was at $150 a barrel, and we still don't have the leases rolling, well, then the finger's going to end up pointing back, and we're going to know why. It's going to be because of a decrease in supply. We're not at that point yet, but we're optimistic. We're optimistic. We're hoping this is a short-term thing, like what Blake said, just on an administrative change, and this is not a long-term policy. We are all a little nervous about it, though.
And just
Right.
to add to what you've all said, as Blake said, Scott Angel's a dear friend of mine. We grew up across the
Right.
street from each other, and being the head of Bessie, he's continuing to preach and go from wherever he can go throughout the United States, preaching that offshore drilling has never been safer, never been more environmentally sound. And what he's preaching is the 3 E's: the economy, the environment, and also energy. And without clean energy from what we're producing right now in the Gulf, the economy in the United States can't survive. It'll lead to just catastrophic ends. So I would tell you that I know it's tough to say, but we all need to keep preaching that we can drill and take care of the environment and take care of the economy. And that's the message all of us have to say. And
Amen.
I think I know we can do it, but a lot of the friends that are on this call from the energy sector, we need to prove, or we have proven that we can drill and we can take care of the environment.
Yep. And we're still very ranked high across the country in these areas, being fourth in natural gas in the world, third in chemical production in the world, second in crude oil refining, and our ports being the #1 in the world as far as tonnage is concerned. We still are great in those industries, even with there are going to be some regulations to trying to make it cleaner and safer.
Thank you.
We have the most to
Yes.
lose if they shut down the oil and gas industry.
I didn't hear you, Blake.
I said you make a good point. It means that we have the most to lose if the oil and gas industry was shut down in the long term. So all praying that this is just a ministerial changes.
Thank you all. Our next question. Recently, voters approved creating an infrastructure bank within the Treasury. So far, it has not been funded. Can we consider using some of the federal dollars coming our way to finance infrastructure projects by funding the bank?
I guess I'll let my colleagues take a stab at it, but I just don't think we have enough clarity.
Is she referring to the what is it called, Bo? The sub-construction fund, the transportation sub-construction fund?
Yeah, I don't think we can use these federal dollars. Look, so at this point, what my understanding is that we can use it for lost revenue, but what infrastructure or road infrastructures or highway infrastructure is not something that we can use it on. However, there is discussion that after this, they're looking at another infrastructure package in the neighborhood of about $3 billion just on infrastructure. So in this tranche, we don't believe that, I mean, unless we can blame it on, I don't think we could use it to fill up that fund that you're mentioning. But if in the local municipalities, if we can prove, let's say like in Iberia Parish, we have the royalty fund. You know, if we can justify and say our royalty fund is down due to a decrease in demand for oil and gas, which has caused the revenue in our royalty fund to drop, and we can backfill our royalty fund on a local level, we may be able to argue that we can use those dollars. But I think it's going to be difficult on a state level unless we can argue that we've got a decrease in tax revenue for it, because it's just not. Basically, what they've said is you can use it for COVID response, you can use it for water, you can use it for sewer, you can use it for broadband, and there's one other item I'm missing on it. But that's the main items that you can use it on these dollars.
And the most important part earlier, and I'm trying to remember the name of this new practice, is the American Rescue Up. I call it the Biden boucherie. Y'all have been to a boucherie, everybody gets something. In this particular case, the taxpayers are on the menu, and your kids and your grandkids will be paying the bill. So this is not necessarily the best thing for the United States, but it is here, and the money will be spent. So the question is how we're going to spend it. I think everybody out there on this phone call and people in our district want this money spent on roads. That's the biggest complaint I hear every day. But like Bo said, there's strings attached to some of this money. Hopefully we can spend the money in rural broadband access. That's technically infrastructure, as Bo was mentioning earlier. Water, sewage, that's all infrastructure. But there's some things that we can do in the legislature. I think there's some bills that you have already seen filed. I think Senator Peacock has one of the bills, which would basically take, if you remember, the Louisiana legislature about 4 years ago had one of the largest tax increases in state's history, the largest tax increase across the entire nation about 4 years ago when they raised a whole penny on the sales tax. That was renewed to 0.45, and that was to basically short stop the deficit that the state had at the time. Well, that 0.45, which is a temporary sales tax, has been going on. I think it's going to go on for around 9 years total once it completely expires in 2025. There's an idea about taking that 0.45 and redirecting it towards the Transportation Subtrust Fund and putting that into roads and infrastructure until it expires in 2025. Remember early on, I talked about using funds for one-time expenditures and not using them on reoccurring expenditures, which grows programs and grows state government. This would be a good idea. Well, I have to read the bill to determine whether the bill is a great idea, but this would be a good concept to discuss about taking funds that you already have that you're using on state government and using those funds to fund things like roads, which we need. Bo made one of the greatest points, the best points that I want you to remember throughout this entire process. In Biden's Boucherie bill, what he said was that if you take all this money, if Louisiana, you take the $5 or $9 billion that Senator Mills talked about, you cannot lower taxes. Is that in the best interest for the taxpayers? Highly doubt it, but that's what we're dealing with. You cannot lower taxes. You cannot offset any taxes with by reducing deductions, credits, expenditures, basically saying that every kind of tax measure that you do needs to be revenue neutral. So Representative Boyer and Representative Marcus Bryant are going to have a very challenging time trying to do tax reform when they're boxed in like this. Not saying they can't do it. They're two very smart gentlemen. I know they'll figure it out and send us some bills to the floor that we can vote on. But it makes it more difficult because whatever you lower the tax rate, you have to basically offset with credits and pull credits and deductions away. So that's some of the things that, and I see there's a question in the panel box talking about strings attached and money and how does that disallows our legislature to spend on reoccurring expenditures? Well, that's a good point. So we are operating in an emergency scenario and we're operating out of the norm. I can tell you this legislature, from what I've seen, particularly the new legislature coming in with Representative Boyer and Representative Bryant, has been one of the most fiscally prudent legislatures that I have seen since I've been there and from times before. But some of these rules are sort of getting bent during COVID-19. For example, Medicaid expansion. In October of 2019, the legislature had put some strong oversight of the Louisiana Department of Health and determined that there were people out there making over $100,000 a year receiving Medicaid. They wasn't eligible for Medicaid, and there was a long list of people. I think there was 70 to 90,000 people that got kicked off the rolls that year because they just wasn't the people that actually needed the Medicaid. They were just signing up for it, and LDH's computer systems were messed up, and they were approving them for the for Medicaid expansion, for Medicaid, excuse me. So we get into the COVID pandemic, and when you receive all these federal funds, part of the federal funds was, well, you got to stop checking eligibility. So if you check over the last year, we've been in this COVID pandemic for 12 months, the Medicaid expansion population has grown by 300,000 people. And it's basically, we have around 40 to 45% of the entire state's population is on government healthcare, which is an issue. I'm not a socialist. I can tell you that right now. And I feel like we're taking steps in that direction every time we take more and more money from the government. So we can't check Medicaid eligibility until some point later in the year. I'll just give you that as one small example of the different types of boxes that legislators are put in right now. When this federal money comes down, it's not free money, guys. Remember, you will pay for it small businesses will pay for it in a tax increase over the next decade. And if that doesn't happen, your grandkids will pay that bill. Now, granted, I'm not making an argument not to spend these dollars because they're going out no matter what. It's out of our hands, but they come with a lot of strings attached. A lot of the strings are contrary to some of the beliefs that the legislature has. But we're smart people. I know Senator Mills is a very smart person. Representative Boyer just thought about some great ideas how we can sweep funds and move things around. I can promise to you that the members on this call will do everything within their power to make sure that we stay fiscally prudent moving forward, that we keep taxpayers in mind, and we try to rebuild the infrastructure of the state while not raising your taxes and being smart. You know where that concept comes from? You guys, the small business community. We want to run this state like a business. I know it's very difficult, but I know that all the members on this call work very hard to do that. And we're getting more information today on the Biden-Boucherie bill. We'll learn more about it, and we're going to figure out how to use that money for the best interest of Louisiana.
Thank you, Representative Miguez. You alluded to roads, and that's one of the major questions here. A critical concern to Acadiana, the state, and economic development in general, and a subject that has run hot and cold for decades, is the development of US Highway 90. Our members would like an update regarding the status of the future I-49 corridor. Who would like to address this issue, please?
I can start off for a second, and I can kick it over to Bo. I think, Bo, do you have more information on this?
I visited with DOTD yesterday, so I have a little bit of an update. But
I'll give a little history of what one of the bills that we passed in the legislature. I know Senator Mills was in the legislature at the time. I believe it was House Bill 578, and we took around $600 or $700 million at the time. It was the end of the last term in 2019. And we negotiated between all regions of the state to move money out of the, I believe it was in a Medicaid trust fund that wasn't getting spent. It was federal dollars. We somehow moved them into our transportation. I believe it was a sub-trust fund, or it was a fund set up to fund those large projects across the state. Commend the Acadiana delegation at the time for coming together as a group, as a powerhouse for Acadiana, and determined that I-49 and the Highway 90 corridor was a priority. We passed that bill, and we got a lot of money. I think it was around several $100 million funded towards that project, and I think it was focused on the overpasses and all upgrading the area around the zoo. I don't sit on transportation, so I don't have the update today. But the importance about that bill was not only did it reappropriate around, I can't remember the exact number, $400 to $600 million across the state, but it was able to pull down. We could use it to match federal funds. At the end of the day, we thought that we could have over $1 billion worth of spending in the state of Louisiana. The most important part about it is, at the end of the day, if we're successful with that bill throughout the entire process, we will have spent $1 billion on roads and not raise your taxes. That's the key. Bo, I'll let you go and give the latest update on what you found out from DOTD.
yeah, so in our area, the two biggest, so there's three big things that are about to happen. The one that's closest is Highway 90 between Lewis Street and Highway 14. I've been on DOTD since the week after I got elected about this project. It's supposed to be torn up and redone. It was pushed off. I saw a date last year until for 2 years from now. I've been working with Secretary Wilson with it, and the bid date now has been moved to June of this year. So we should see dirt fly on the redoing of Highway 90 between 14 and Lewis Street. I would think as early as this fall. The other items more towards the Lafayette area, the Ambassador overpass or the Ambassador extension and Highway 90, they are in the planning stages of that. They should be going out to bid, I believe, next year at this time to start that project. That's a huge project, and then there's going to be about a year delay, and they're going to start the same type of project with Verrat School Road where it hits Highway 90. So I know this is the Greater Iberia Chamber, but everything going to it, obviously everything that happens in Lafayette Parish and a lot of my district, this is gonna affect it. So these are three big projects. There's also, and all of this is going to be to interstate standards. Also another big project happening just west of us this year in St. Mary Parish. I forgot between what roads it's between, but it's like a 5-mile stretch in St. Mary Parish. So in our area, there is a lot of work that's going to be taking place in the next 2 to 3 years. I was with Mayor Freddie DeCourt yesterday and Mayor Pro Tem Gosselin with DOTD, and we're talking about a frontage road project in New Iberia that's been long overdue. And they started talking about the planning stages on this small stretch of frontage road, and they're talking about 1.5 years of planning. And it's just amazing how things don't move when they get into some of those departments, but we're trying to push that along. And while we're talking on some of the transportation as well, dirt is flying right now, or you should see flags out and the Daspit Road Bridge between Cemetery Highway and then I think it's Highway 86. It goes back to Jane Street. That was a project that was supposed to start at the beginning of grinding season when the cane was starting to be cut. I called DOTD after talking to residents and sugarcane farmers, and we put a pause on that project to wait till grinding was over. If they would have pulled up those undersurfaces, it would just destroy the road even quicker. So they're starting to move that dirt now. Also, at this time next year, you should see dirt moving as well on the Highway 86, which is Daspit Road from Cemetery Highway all the way to the city of Lowerville or into Lowerville. So I think that's almost 6 miles of highway that you're going to see. That's a big stretch as well. So that's just a couple of updates, but the big ones are obviously Highway 9. Oh, and the realigning of the curve in Koto. They should be, I'm looking at a paper here. That all should be happening in the next couple of months. They should start the bidding process by this summer for the realigning of the curbs in Koto as well.
You want to talk about the renovations at the port?
Sure. They obviously, if y'all would have seen in the newspaper a couple of weeks ago, there was a big announcement through Capital Outlay. We've been able to secure, and I say we, I mean we is. And I'm pointing at Senator Mills because he's a big piece of this. Senator Mills has been just unbelievably for Iberia Parish when it comes to capital outlay and helping us secure monies. The three of us beat up on capital outlay on the House side, but then Senator Mills has a sweet way of coming and just finishing everything off in the Senate and making sure that we're taken care of. But $32 billion in capital projects to lower those gas lines under the Port Canal. Former Senator and now Port Director Craig Romero is relentless when it comes to trying to attract money to the port and to attract business to the port. And he is a crazy good ambassador for the Port of Iberia and can find dollars like no other. So if y'all talk to Port Director Romero, please send him kudos. He's doing an excellent job there. But that was a great announcement, and soon that I think y'all will all be really excited about.
Thank you so much for that update regarding all of those potential new developments that will benefit our area. In the interest of time, this is a great discussion. I need to offer each of our panelists about a minute for closing comments. Senator Mills, would you like to go first?
Sure. Once again, thanks to everybody. And Janet, anytime you want to get us together to discuss, we're not shy, we'll talk. So you just get together. I guess the only thing we didn't get to talk about is maybe some of the pressing issues that we'll see in our committee. So I'll just give you real quick. From the healthcare side, being the chairman of health and welfare, I think you're going to have a lot of discussions that maybe my colleagues will never see. One issue that's a big issue, I'm getting calls already in Iberia Parish is, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, can they practice independently? Because during the pandemic, rules were basically relaxed and they can right now practice independently. You're going to see all type of, as Blake talked about earlier, you're going to see probably Medicaid issues coming across from healthcare. You're going to see water quality issues. And I think it's going to be a big issue we're going to need to talk about. We've got a $5 billion backlog of water projects. And as Bo and everybody else talked about, maybe some of the stimulus money can be deployed in that correct fashion. You'll still see legislation on right to life. You'll see foster care issues. So we talked about tax issues, we talked about budget issues, but in those 5 non-fiscal bills, you're going to see a lot of issues. So I would just tell everybody, call us up if you have an issue that's important to you, let us know. And as you said at the beginning, Karen, a lot of this is live streamed. So follow it and let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Boye, or yes?
We'll go seniority. Go ahead, Representative Miguez.
If we're going seniority by age, I guess you'll go first. That was my joke of the day. Thank you so much. So some of the issues, some of the other important topics that we didn't talk about yet, I think one's very important to the people of Louisiana is election integrity. The Republican delegation will be bringing a package forward to make sure that we have a secure and transparent election process. We want everyone, Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter what party you are, to believe in our election process and get out there and vote, and to know that your vote counts. We didn't have as many issues, luckily, as a lot of the other states across this nation in the last very controversial presidential election, but we want to make sure that we can improve on our election system even more. So you'll see a package of bills coming forward to do just that. Also, social media censoring has been a big issue that I hear from a lot of constituents. They believe very strongly in their constitutional rights and their right to free speech. And depending on their political views, sometimes they feel like they're either being fact checked, they're being censored, and they don't agree with it. I think you'll see some bills come through the process which put civil liability on social media companies and allow those constituents who feel like they had their First Amendment rights infringed upon to file a lawsuit against those social media companies, as well as some other bills to protect our citizens' right to speech against social media companies. Bo mentioned tax reform. Tax reform will also predicate also you hear some conversation about redistricting. Closed primaries will be discussed. Some of the first steps towards redistricting will be discussed. So that Committee of House and Governmental Affairs will be very busy in the House. Expansion of rural broadband will be very important. After COVID-19, we'll learn how important having the internet is for our children to learn, as well as for our businesses to thrive. And it's becoming one of the largest economic drivers locally. And there's still tons of places across Louisiana that don't have rural broadband, and there's a ton of money coming down from the feds for infrastructure spending. And we want to make sure that Louisiana is postured in the right place to get these funds, to match these funds, and to spend them in the most appropriate place where you and your neighbors and your neighboring businesses can have access to high-speed internet. It's a necessity for our success in the future. The last thing I'll tell you about is Biden and some of his buddies up there have been talking about taking your gun rights away for some time. Talking about taking away, sporting rifles and limiting mag capacities, taking first steps towards a gun registry. And many of the constituents in my area across Louisiana but are very fearful of their constitutional rights, their Second Amendment rights, and what the gun control measures may come out of Washington. Well, I can tell you that there'll be some very strong bills in the legislature that'll take a stance against some of the things that are happening in DC, that'll further strengthen your rights, your Second Amendment rights, and your rights to defend yourselves and your family. That's some of the things you'll see. I'm sure there'll be a lot more than that. It's supposed to be a very limited session, like Senator Mills said, with only 5 bills offered. But keep in mind that last year, we had a COVID-19 pandemic shut down the session, so everyone's eager to bring their bills forward, and it'll be a very interesting session coming forward. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak to you here today. You guys know where I stand. I'm going to stand and fight for the people of my district, fight for the betterment of Louisiana and for our future generations to come. Thank you all so much for having me. I'd be happy to come back at any time. And I'm very thankful to serve with these 3 gentlemen on the call with me. They've been a great delegation to work with. We had different political views at times, but couldn't have picked better guys. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Marcus.
You want me to go? Okay, thank you for having this. I just want to add to the different things that Senator Mills and Senator Blake added, but we didn't talk about, which would be good for our state, is an increase in revenue from sports betting. Sport betting is going to be a major deal this session, and the regulations and the tax, what tax structure is going to be put in place to bring, to actually start the sports betting, whether by phone, whether walking up, or whether having an app on your phone, which will bring a large increase in revenue to our state. We also have to deal with policing and criminal justice reform and house criminal justice. There's a policing task force, a bipartisan policing task force that has several bills that's going to come out this session for us to address how we're going to go forward with the different policing issues. We never forget about our kids and juvenile justice. A lot of bills will be filed in House Criminal Justice addressing juvenile justice, fines and fees, juvenile life, and our education system, education reform, and how we want to go forward about educating our kids in this in our state, especially dealing with COVID, made us understand the necessity for rural broadband and not having access in our rural communities to strong internet service. I think Representative Miguez and Boye addressed that also. So thank y'all for having this conversation. I think it's great for our constituents to understand what we're doing in Baton Rouge. Thank you.
Thank you. Has everyone, all of our panelists have had a chance? Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, bro.
Yeah, so I'll finish up. And so just real quick, and everybody can see that Representative Bryant is practicing safety while driving. He's seen the billboards that says click it or ticket. He's fast. He's safely fastened into his front seat.
That's right.
But thank y'all for having us. Blake kind of touched on the big item that I'll be involved in with regards to redistricting on House and Government Affairs. It's going to come up a lot this year, but just I've been getting some calls from some of you who have questions. More than likely, we won't get the final census numbers until the fall. So we likely will either come into a special session late this year or maybe potentially even the beginning of 2022. So that was the only other item that I wanted to touch on was with regards to redistricting. Y'all have heard me speak enough this morning. So I just want to thank everyone for dialing in. If you have questions, reach out to my office. We look at all the emails. We try to respond to just about all of them. We try to respond to all the phone calls. So, feel free to let us know where you stand on a position, or if you have an idea to make a bill. Thank you to Ms. Karen as well, and to the Lowerville Tigers over there for hosting us this morning. We appreciate everybody for being on.
Thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. Unfortunately, we did not get to all of the questions in the chat box because of time, but we will take those up in a future discussion. So at this time, we'd like to close. The up next webinar is on federally designated opportunity zones in Iberia Parish and what they mean to the parish businesses. This is set for Tuesday, March 23rd at 1:30. The panel includes Monique Boulay, CEO of the Acadiana Planning Commission, Chad Lacombe, Development Planner of the Acadiana Planning Commission, and Mike Tarantino, CEO of the Iberia Development Foundation. There's no cost for the webinar, and registration is open now at iberiachamber.org/upnext. Chamber ribbon cuttings are also being held in person and through Facebook Live. These events are great ways to continue our business networking. And our next one is set for Tuesday, March 30th at 10:30 at Crawfish and Go on Lewis Street, and Tuesday, April 13th at 10:30, Keys for Sober Living on St. Peter Street. Information on all upcoming events can be found at iberiachamber.org. Remember, finally, leadership, Iberia takes applications all year long, and watch for news on the 2021 annual banquet and the World Championship Gumbo Cook-Off. COVID forced us to take a hiatus, but hopefully and prayerfully we'll be back even stronger this year. Thank you to our panel for all of the work in Iberia Parish and in Baton Rouge, taking care of us here as we try to make our community a better place. Travel safely as you go back and forth to Baton Rouge this session. We wish you the best. Thank you to everyone in attendance today. And if you're not already a chamber member, consider joining. We're an active organization inspired by outstanding business leaders dedicated to building a remarkable community and a thriving economy. And we'd love to have you with us. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.